Hi, this is Paul Hoyt. Welcome to our Awakened Conversation tonight with special guest Paul Lemberg here on Wednesday, June the 24th, 2015. Tonight, I really want this to be interactive, so for those of you who are in live attendance, if you think about a question or a particular discussion topic that you would like for us to address, please take a pencil or a pen and write it down so that you don't forget it. And when we get to the end of the call, you'll have an opportunity to chat with us live, and we can enter into that discussion or answer any questions that you might have. The agenda for tonight is that we're going to have a brief review of what I mean by an awakened CEO. I'm going to share some inspirational thoughts with you. Then we're going to turn our attention to my special guest, Paul Lemberg, and then we're going to have questions and discussion after that. We expect the conversation to last from 45 to 60 minutes or so. The Awakened CEO system, which is a new system that I came out with here in 2015, is really for everyone who wants to build a strong business and be the best person that they can be at the same time. To me, the expression of being an awakened person has two different perspectives to it. From the mental perspective, it means to wake up from sleep, to become conscious, to become aware and alert and sharp and clear and focused. It just means to be sharp and on your game from a mental perspective. But the term awakened also means, from a spiritual perspective, to have a higher consciousness, to become enlightened, to be detached and observant, to be in the now, as Eckhart Tolle likes to call it, to see your potential. And for me, it's just being absolutely amazed at this incredible human experience. I find myself looking out the window several times a day and just being amazed at the birds and the trees and the flowers that I see outside my window. I really think that this human experience is quite an amazing thing. Being awakened, I think, is part of the natural progress of the evolution of mankind. And I think our planet is becoming more awakened and aware all the time. And I think part of the reason is because we're exposed to so many new ideas and new cultures. And I think we're all experiencing technology-fueled evolution as we get this experience through the internet and through dozens or hundreds of channels on our television sets. One of my favorite psychology authors is Abraham Maslow, who introduced the Maslow's hierarchy of needs in 1943. And he talks about how we as humans first take care of our physiological needs for air and water and food, and then our safety needs, and then our love and belonging needs, and then our need for self-esteem and self-image, and then finally self-actualization. And to me, being an awakened person, being a conscious, alert, sharp person, is the very highest form of human experience. It's the highest form of self-actualization for me. On the other side of the business, or on the other side of the street, we also have this business. Most of us on this call and listening to the recordings are CEOs. And being a great CEO means running a profitable, scalable, and sustainable business. To me, scalable is optional, but profitable and sustainable are required. We expect ups and downs along the way, but long-term success, I think, is a fundamental requirement of being a great CEO. So then an awakened CEO, somebody that's running a great business and is an awakened person at the same time, is alert, aware, sharp, and clear, optimizes personal performance for themselves and others, is confident in who they are and what they do, yet humble to the process of growth. They're respected for who they are. They acknowledge, respect, encourage, and support everyone that they meet, and they serve others through their leadership by example. An awakened CEO sets a clear vision for others to follow, has a great team and collaborates well with that team, runs a smart business, makes tough choices, plans and focuses, listens, learns, and adapts along the way, and guides, mentors, and coaches the people around him, and yes, even cares and loves for the people who work with him, the suppliers that he has, the investors, the people that he runs to in the circumstance of the business, because as we become more and more awakened, the love within us for everyone grows, and that certainly includes our customers and our employees and our contractors and our business associate. What an awakened CEO gets in return for that is great teamwork and collaboration, great loyalty, a stronger business, and in my case, and I think many people's cases, great personal satisfaction. My experience is that awakening and the business success come hand in hand, that we gain business savvy and wisdom, real life wisdom, at the same time. That as we grow the business, our business grows us, and vice versa. My personal experience is also that you can achieve a very high level of consciousness without living in a monastery, without going to India, without being ordained, just by focusing your time and attention on your inner work day after day. And when you get out of balance and into the shadows a little bit, you can learn to rebound very, very quickly. My experience is that you can have an enormous amount of peace, joy, strength, wisdom, and love in your life and build a profitable business at the same time, and it feels absolutely great. With the Awakened CEO system, we encourage people to focus on 3 areas of their life simultaneously: business growth, personal growth, and professional growth. And we encourage people to find the success formula that works for them. This is my particular success formula. Out of the 16 hours or so that I'm awake, I work about 12 hours a day. I spend about an hour on professional growth. I spend an hour, maybe a little bit more, on personal growth. And then I have about 2 hours of balancing activities, I call them. That would be exercise and maybe playing some video games and watching a favorite TV show. Just things that kind of let my hair down. Well, I guess if I had hair, I would let it down. In the old days, I used to let my hair down. Today, I just kind of relax and smile and do the things that I really enjoy doing and really enjoy life. So I invite you to play with me the awakening game. And I define the awakening game as finding ways of being at your highest vibration every second of every day through frequent self-assessments and constant focus on shifting your energy to be in a higher vibration, to be in a better mood, to be in the zone, in the flow, in the spirit, whatever you call that experience in your life where you are at your optimum best, where you're being the very best person and feeling the best that you possibly can. I want to share a little inspirational moment with you. As most of you know, I write inspirational books. I've published a CD and a couple of inspirational books. And I have these insights periodically that come to me, and whenever I have one, I write it down so I can learn from it and remember it. And then when I get 100 or 150 or so, I write them down in the context of a book. And I was inspired to share one of those little insights with you today by this quote that I read on a Facebook post the other day. And it says, "Everything that you've ever wanted is on the other side of fear." I invite you to think about that for a little bit. Everything that you ever wanted, a loving relationship, a successful business, the love and respect of the people around you, great health, all of that is generally on the other side of fear. And to get to the other side of fear sometimes takes a little courage. I want to talk to you about one of the ways that I have found of getting on that other side of fear, and I call this little steps. The key in getting into action is to take a little step. Sometimes it's hard. You may be tired or scared or experiencing some unconscious resistance, or maybe it's just open fear that you have. You can spend a little time considering the source of your hesitation, but sooner or later, you simply must take that little step, that first step, and then take another step, and then another, until at some point of time in your journey, the steps start to become easier. And then you'll be taking easy little steps. And you'll find that you can take that next step just a little bit quicker. And then you'll be taking easy and quick little steps. And then as the pace picks up, I think you'll find that your spirit lifts. You can begin to chuckle just a little bit. You can begin to be lighthearted, and then maybe even laugh and sing and skip and dance and play along the way. And then the steps will be easy and quick little happy steps. And then the job, and then the day, and then the rest of your life will be a blessing, just by taking easy and quick little happy steps all day long. But it all starts with that first little step. So I invite you to ask yourself, are you moving in the direction of your dreams, or are you stuck? Are you moving slowly, or are you moving easily? Or are you moving quickly and happily? And practice taking that first step, no matter how hard it is, no matter how scared you are. Take that little step, and then another, until you come to the point to where you're taking easy, quick little happy steps too. With that, I want to turn our attention to our very special guest, Paul Lemberg, who is with us tonight. Paul Lemberg gave me a little bit of an introduction that I'd like to read for you now. Paul helps entrepreneurs become wealthy. No kidding. Paul has consulted with Fortune 100 companies like Cisco, Adobe, IBM, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan Chase, Mass Mutual, and Accenture, but his real and true passion is helping small business owners and CEOs double and triple their profits and sometimes grow their companies more than tenfold. Over the last few years, Paul's one-on-one small business clients, who range in size from brand new startups to companies with around $20 million in sales, have profited by more than $370 million in bankable put-in-your-pocket cash, and that's the equivalent of billions of dollars in extra sales. Paul's been an entrepreneur most of his life. After a 3-year stint as a computer programmer in corporate America, he launched his first software company with a partner and $3,000 of credit card debt, selling it 3 years later for a valuation of just under $9 million. He sold his second company to a large German bank and has started several others since, including a sales training company and a business coaching franchise, which failed spectacularly. Paul's newest trainings include the hyper-selling system for outbound business development, formerly entitled Sales Voodoo, Formula 5 Overdrive, which helps entrepreneurs double their profits by making small, easy-to-implement changes, and the system is so brilliant you don't have to be, which I love the name of his last program. Paul is developing a new series of trainings, bringing spirituality into business, which is what encouraged me to invite him to be our special guest on this call, because I'm very excited to ask him the questions that I normally ask people. But first, I'm going to invite him to say hello. Hello and welcome to our call tonight, Paul. Are you there?
Hey, Paul, thank you for that introduction. I've heard it. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay,
Yes, we
good.
can.
Yeah, we seem to be having some kind of delay.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, good. So thank you for the introduction, Paul. I know I wrote it, but it's great to hear you read it.
Thank you very much.
You infuse it with such passion. It's great.
Well, I really like you, Paul, and I've listened to a lot of your presentations in the CEO space community, and I love everyone that I've heard, and I've always enjoyed our personal interaction as well, and I really admire the success that you have had personally, and the way that you help other people too. But what really prompted me to invite you here was your focus on spiritual and personal growth. I have this theory that many really great CEOs, very talented, sharp businessmen and women, are also focused on a personal journey. And I want to give people an opportunity to share that. So I have my standard 6 questions that I like to ask our guests on the Awaken Conversation show. So I'm gonna ask them to you one by one if you're ready.
Let's go. This is as much of a surprise to me as anybody, so go ahead.
All right. Tell us about your business journey and your business background and your current business a little bit.
So my business journey is kind of a funny one. I went to art school, and I have a fine arts degree where I studied design and primarily photography. And I got out of art school and was a performance artist for a number of years. And I was the classic starving artist. Most people who get out of art school do not make their living in the arts, and they end up being professors, or they go into the gallery business, or they do something. I have a few friends from college who are world famous artists, but they're in the minority. I was in the majority, and I spent a few years kind of bouncing around being a starving artist for a while, and I decided that that wasn't how I wanted to live my life. And somebody said to me, very strangely, they said, go be a computer programmer. Anyone can do it. And so that turns out, I don't think that's generally true for the population. It just happened to be true for me. And without any training or education or anything of the sort, I walked into a programming job, and it was something I was really good at.
Wow.
I spent 3 years writing software. I worked initially for Deloitte's and what became Deloitte's, and then I worked for General Electric, a division of GE. And after 3 years, I realized that I wasn't ever going to get to run the place, and I wasn't going to be able to make the kinds of creative decisions that I wanted to be making in my life. After all, I went to art school. So I started a software company with a partner with $3,000 of credit card debt. And we did what you classically do when you started a software company 30 years ago, which is you did consulting work. And we did a bunch of consulting work. All our consulting work was in the banking business. And over the course of time, our work evolved into a complete system for international banking. And I started selling that system around the world. And we sold in Europe, primarily in Europe, Canada. We sold a few systems in Asia, sold this stuff all over the place, and eventually sold the company to a much larger US-based software company. Worked for those guys for a while, did as most entrepreneurs do. I got fired and got to take a year off, which was a great time to retire in the middle of my career. Took a year off and then started another company in the exact same line of business. These guys had violated my non-compete, so I had some opportunity. Took my experience, started another company, ultimately sold that to a German bank. Decided to leave the software company. I was never destined for it in the first place. Went into consulting. And I did a bunch of consulting, really interesting stuff, which was research-based strategy for large technology companies. First in the hardware industry, did things like recommended form factors for some of the early laptop computers, things of that ilk. Then went into the services side, did a bunch of research in what made system integration companies successful and what made outsourcing companies successful. And all that was great until one day I literally woke up, and this was sort of the real transition point for me. I woke up I guess this was late spring of 1995, and you hear the voice in your head a few times in your life.
Yeah.
You know, it's not really in your head, and you can kind of tell the difference. I heard the voice, and the voice said, "You're not doing your life's work, you're getting older, and you'd better get busy."
Wow.
And it was crystal clear. And I was like, who said that? You know, I had just woken up. It's like, who said that? And of course, you know, I'm just like looking around for somebody to respond. And I went about my day trying to figure out what that meant and asking for clarification. You know, could you give me a little more here? And nothing. I mean, nothing happened. And I'm like, okay, this isn't helpful. So it took me a week to quit my job.
Wow.
And within a week, I'd left what was a perfectly serviceable job that paid really well, traveled around the world, worked with fascinating people. It just wasn't what I was supposed to be doing, and I knew that. And I took another 3 months to try to figure out what I was going to do with my life. And my friends kept saying there was this new thing at the time called coaching. And coaching was for executives. There was executive coaching, and there was personal coaching. And neither one of those was me. I didn't know anything about being an executive. I was a refugee from the corporate world. And I certainly didn't want to be a fake shrink and be a personal coach. So I didn't know what to do with it. And friends were like, no, you're really good at this. You should go do it. So I have a saying, which is that you're not, when everyone around you is wrong, you're not being coachable. And you know, everyone around me was wrong, and I started, you know, I had that saying, and I started having to listen to what was being said to me, and I came up with this concept that I could coach people's businesses. And it wasn't a common thing then. There were no McKinseys for people with $150,000 startups.
Right.
And so I hung out my shingle. And I said, I'm going to help people grow their small businesses. And I have been doing that in one form or another since late 1995. I worked initially with anybody who would pay my then meagerly fees, and eventually focused my attention in something that I knew something about, which was the software industry. For about 6 years, I did nothing but work with software companies. At one point in the early 2000s, I got kind of bored, and I started working with general businesses again. I developed strategy programs. I started doing information products, and have been evolving this thing ever since. And that kind of brings me to right where we are on your call. I hope that wasn't too long an answer.
No, that was a good answer. I enjoyed hearing that story because I didn't know the stories about the voice in the head and the, you know, and how
Yeah, the voice was big.
Yeah, that's a huge one. Every once in a while we get tapped on the shoulder that way.
I look for that. I listen for that. You know, the big thing for me, the biggest thing for me was I realized that I didn't really care that much about large corporations. It's hard for me to embrace the notion of caring about the corporation. And of course, the corporation's filled with people, but the corporation behaves as if it's not filled with people.
Yeah,
Uh, and so I wasn't that impressed with earning another 100 million for IBM, you know, figuring something out for them. And I really wanted to make a difference in the lives of entrepreneurs. I can get on this soapbox pretty easily. I believe that entrepreneurs are the backbone of the United States and probably the whole world, but I know more about the U.S. I believe that entrepreneurs are responsible for every great thing that's ever happened here. And so they're the people I care the most about. And it's kind of like this, Paul. You find somebody with a $1 million business, and you get them to 3 million or 4 million or 5 million, and then they can sell it for 5 or $10 million, and
yeah,
you've transformed their life in monsterful ways. You've transformed their lives and their families' lives and their employees' lives and probably their church's life, and then their whole community is going to change, and all these things shift when you do that. You had 100 million at IBM and maybe somebody gets a promotion.
yeah, yeah.
And the shareholders make another few bucks, and frankly, it just didn't light me up. And when I started working with entrepreneurs, I got lit up.
I
So
sh I
that's how I
share
find myself here.
I share that enthusiasm. I could have said that almost those exact words myself. My heart and soul goes out to the CEO, to the entrepreneur, because 90% of them, jump into business with a lot of courage and a lot of energy and a lot of optimism, and they haven't got the foggiest idea what they're doing. Like I when like I did when I started my first business in 1980 through 85. So that's my heart too. Now I want to switch just a little bit. You started on this a little bit when we talked about your business journey, but talk to me about your inner journey, especially any churches or spiritual communities that you've been a part of along the way, and your current personal and spiritual growth practices.
Okay, this is a much harder thing to answer, but let me give it a shot.
Okay.
So I was raised by atheists.
Uh-huh.
I was raised by people who were what I would say is culturally very Jewish. My
Mhm.
father was going to be a rabbi, and somewhere along the way he lost his faith. My mother was raised by two people who were Orthodox Jews. They didn't call themselves that; they just called themselves Jews.
Mhm.
Um, but deeply believed in the Torah, deeply believed in every aspect of the thing. And my parents, I don't even know how they found each other, but they were both atheists, and that's how we were raised. When I was getting married for the second time, I told my mom it was the Jewish New Year, and I said I was going to shul the next day, and her response was, "Why?" So that's kind of that's how I got to. How should I say this? About 10 years ago, I started thinking maybe there was something more than this. Yeah, it took me
Wow.
a long time. I'm a slow learner, and I had this sense. You'll have to laugh at this. Most of us we have goals. We say, "Oh, I'm going to make $1 million next year. Oh, I'm going to buy a bigger house, or maybe I'm going to downsize and buy a smaller house. I'm going to get my kids through college. I'm going to, travel to Japan." Who knows what your goals are? I had a goal on my goal sheet was that I was going to become spiritual. That was it. And that was, I mean, that's kind of a weird goal. It's like that notion about spiritual materialism. That was my goal, and it lived there just like a goal on the goal sheet. And I had no idea what what that even meant at the time. But it sat there on my goal sheet. It's probably been there since the middle 2000s.
Wow.
And I was doing what I did, but truthfully, I've never been a churchgoer. I've never been a synagogue goer. I've never been a temple goer of any kind. I read widely, and I can, tell you boatloads about the history of world religions, particularly Christianity. But I can't, I wasn't that kind of belonger. I've read the scriptures, I've read the Old Testament, I've read the New Testament, I've read the Quran, I've studied these things, but it wasn't, inside of me. And something, how should I say this? Something started happening that was different. And this was probably 5 or 6 years ago
Mm-hmm.
that I just started having the feeling that A, things were different, that B, that the stuff that met the eye was far less interesting than the stuff that didn't, and that right, and that there was tremendous not only enrichment and fulfillment and satisfaction, but that there was tremendous power in embracing this. And became a follower of Esther Hicks,
Uh-huh.
and I thought that material just blew my mind, and I started embracing that material. And then The Secret came along, and that felt like a watered-down version, but I liked that direction of things. And I started applying the notion of law of attraction to who I was becoming rather than what I was going to get from it. And I think that opened a lot of things up for me. So I moved along in this direction, and it's still, to say I was a spiritual anything I'd be hard pressed to put it in those terms. And I had left my marriage, and I'd gotten to the point where I was thinking about it was time to find a new relationship. And what I wanted, I was clear in that relationship was that I only was willing to have a relationship with somebody who had traveled down this path already.
Yeah.
And this woman stepped into my life who was very much that, who I don't want to say she was ascended in any way, and I don't mean you're ascended, but I mean in the big sense.
Mm-hmm.
But she was sure a lot farther along than I was, and definitely had some of what New Age people call gifts.
Yeah.
And, ability as an energy healer, abilities as a clairvoyant, abilities as a psychic. So, all sorts of interesting things. Did you ever meet Rhonda?
I certainly did. Lovely lady.
Yeah. So we were together for about 2 years, and along that and during that time, I got pulled very far along this path, in a very non-intentional way, but just pulled along like I was along for the ride.
Mm-hmm.
And she died about 1.5 years ago,
Yeah.
and in her dying, I got pulled along a lot farther. And I got to the point where I started to become much more, like I said, much more conscious of the things I couldn't see than the things I could, and much more conscious of this other part of me, which for lack of a better word, I call soul. I mean, that's a good word. I don't really know if that really carries the full meaning or intent. I don't even know what the full meaning of it is, but I have become much more conscious of being a soul in a body rather than as a human who happens to have a soul. And that's kind of where I find myself today, that more of my thought processes, more of my kind of daily experience is starting to be driven by that. So that's kind of the journey. I feel like I'm at the edges, at the very beginnings of a journey, rather than being able to describe the whole journey to you.
I love that. And that's, by the way, after 50 years of working on myself. I'm much slower than you are. I started a long time ago. I still feel like I'm on the edge of that next chapter or that next experience, that next level of my own evolution. Maybe that's the way it constantly is here in this human experience. It certainly has been for me, and it sounds like it is for you too.
I just want to throw something in there, which is I have this thing on, it's just an index card. It's a 3x5 index card. I should have a fancier little plaque for it. But all it says is beginner's mind. And it's, this is what the martial arts people say,
Yeah.
which is that, you go through, we have all these fancy colored belts in martial arts, but in traditional martial arts, you start with a white belt, you wear it long enough, it turns into a black belt, it just gets dirty. And it turns into a black belt long enough, and eventually you're a black belt, and then if you're really on the path to mastery, you dump it and you get a new white belt.
Huh.
And so they call that beginner's mind. And I have had this experience recently, and it's really kind of rocking my world, in that I have walked around for a long time thinking I knew stuff. And I'm finally getting to that place where I'm realizing I don't. So,
yeah.
That to me is a big deal.
I love that. One of my very favorite expressions is that God invented small businesses so that he could teach very hard-working and bright people the lesson of humility.
So I love it because we say that small business and sales in particular, but small business is one of the truest paths to personal development.
I'm with you 100% on that. Paul, I got several more questions for you. I'm going to take just a little break here and put in a word for our sponsors if we can, which is me, of course. I encourage you all to participate in my office hours presentations, webinars that I do almost every Monday. We didn't do it this last week because I had pending jury duty, but it's an interactive webinar much like the one that you're seeing right now, but we're focused strictly on business, or about 90% on business, as opposed to this Awakened Conversation, which is 90% focused on personal and spiritual growth. So that's Mondays at noon Pacific time. Watch your emails for sign-up information. And if any of you are interested in some more information about the Awakened CEO system, if you'd like some more information on our personal coaching programs or our business growth programs, so we can help you grow both personally and professionally and make more money and have more fun in your business, I encourage you to give me an email or give me a call. My email address is paul@paulhoyt.com, and my telephone number is 415-997-8001, and I'm pretty easy to find at paulhoyt.com. So thank you for letting me take just a minute and encourage those and invite you to reach out and connect with us if there's anything that we can help you do, help you be on your journey of personal growth and business growth. Now back to my special guest, Paul, and a few more questions for him. You mentioned one spiritual teacher, Esther Hicks, on your list, and that's my next question for you is, who are currently your favorite spiritual teachers that you focus in on?
So right at the moment, boy, this sounds so arrogant. It's mostly internal, but I can name a few. There's a book which I have read over and over and over by a man named Eric Butterworth, and it's called Spiritual Economics. And I recommend that book highly. Eric was, I say Eric like he was a friend. I've never met him. He died before I knew who he was a Unity minister in New York City, and he held his Sunday services at Lincoln Center. That's the kind of following he had. And wow. It's an absolutely phenomenal book that I cannot recommend enough. It was, up until recently, there was no Kindle version of it, so I bought an extra copy, tore it apart, threw it in a scanner so that I could have it on my Kindle with me wherever I went. Now you can actually buy a Kindle version of it. There's another book that's very similar to that. They're almost identical, which is called Creative Mind and Success, and it's sort of the mini version of Ernest Holmes. You know, Ernest Holmes has that big fat Science of Mind book.
Yep.
This is sort of the condensed version of that. Lately, I've been reading work that's attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, who I can never quite pronounce that second name properly. And, you know, Hermes was I say supposedly because, you know, where are the facts? But Hermes was supposedly an Egyptian scholar 3,000 years ago.
Wow.
There are people who assert that Hermes was Abraham's mentor, and that it was Hermes' teachings which found their way into early what became early Judaism or early Hebrewism or whatever you call it. And Hermes is a book that's attributed to him is something called the Emerald Tablets. And the Emerald Tablets are sort of it's very fragmentary, and when you buy a copy of it, what you'll get is 20 different translations of these fragments that were found. But what's really interesting is something called the Kybalion. And the Kybalion is, it's sort of the basics of everything. And every religious practice that I have done any work in, whether it's Judaism or Christianity or Buddhism or Hinduism or any of it, that they all have a lot taken from this early work. And that's the thing where I've been spending most of my attention, is reading and rereading this, because it's dense and it's obscure. So you've got to work your way through it.
Interesting, very interesting. Well, as you work your way through these texts and listen to your favorite spiritual teachers, what are some of the most recent lessons that you have learned?
So the thing that I've been thinking about lately uh, is how unknowable everything is.
Uh-huh.
And, really, I said it a moment ago. I said, I think of myself as a soul living inside of a human body, and then I'm immediately struck with the question of what the heck does that mean?
Uh-huh.
And, so the thing that I've been focused on mostly in the past few weeks, I've been thinking this, which is, people talk about knowing your life's purpose. And frankly, I think your life's purpose is unknowable. I think that it could because of the way I think about it, I'm not really so much worried about the human being's purpose as worried about the soul's purpose.
Hmm.
And except I think the soul's purpose is unknowable to me as a human being, right? That it exists in parallel with my knowable human existence, and that so it exists there. And while I can't necessarily know what my soul's, how could I know what my soul's purpose is? I believe my soul came to, live in this human body for some period of time to learn some lessons or to have some experience, and Lord knows if I know what those things are. But I know this. I can tell when I'm in resonance with that purpose or not. So without knowing what the content is, I can know that the path I'm following as a human being, as Esther Hicks says, she says it either feels good or it doesn't,
Yeah.
right? That there's only two feelings. There's feeling good and feeling bad. And what I finally realized for me what that means is, there's only feeling good and feeling bad. Everything else is a flawed human interpretation of those basics. Everything else is probably my ego judging and assessing things and trying to line it up with, whether I have what I want or whether I don't have what I want. And I'm starting to realize that that stuff just isn't what's important. So I'm almost like, it's almost like throwing out all the content. And so I look at how I live my life on a daily basis, and either it feels like it's the right thing or it doesn't feel like it's the right thing. And while that seems trivial and raw, I'm starting to feel like that's really what matters.
I love it.
And so that's that becomes, for me, that becomes the guidance system. It's like, am I moving in the right direction or not? Hard to say from an analytical standpoint. I could add up my bank account and my possessions and, what schools my kids go to and, whatever other markers that my ego would look to embrace. And then I can say, all right, does this feel like I'm going in the right direction or not? So this is where I find myself today on, this day.
I love that. Last canned question for you, and then we're going to open it up to questions and discussions from the attendees on the call. So if you've got a question, now's a good time to kind of raise your hand or to type it into the chat box, and we'll call on you here in just a minute. So the last question for you, Paul. Do you have any tips for our listeners? Any advice that you would give us on our journey of personal and spiritual growth?
So I would imagine that everybody on this call is a occasional to continual meditator.
Mhm.
And so my first tip is that if you're not one of these sort of people, to get that practice going immediately and to keep it really simple. To just keep it really simple, and I focus on breath. I've been a mantra meditator for about 20 years, and all that really means, for those who don't know, is that a word or an image or something along that lines hooks my attention, and I try to not be a concentrator. A lot of people refer to concentration as meditation. And they focus on an idea, or they dig into an idea, and I look at it very differently, which is my goal, at least for one time per day, is to empty my mind of whatever I can. And when I'm done, then things come back to me. So that's like to me, that's really important. I say that I can't know my soul's purpose, and in fact I feel like as a human being I can't know any of these things. And yet I also feel that when I can empty my mind of all my human concerns, and when I can empty my mind of all my ego-based concerns, then things show up.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. The other thing, and this was, we have a mutual friend, September Dorman, and last summer she encouraged me to start handwriting. I had been keeping a journal for pretty steadily for about 9 years. And I'd been doing it for much longer than that, but in a very steady way. I've been keeping a journal for 9 years. And I had been keeping it online because my handwriting was never very good and it had gotten to be extremely bad. So she encouraged me last August to start keeping a handwritten journal.
Mm-hmm.
And I resisted it like crazy, and then I started doing it. And at the same time that I did that, I started doing all my mind maps by hand. And I used to do it for a long time. I did them using software because it was easier and you could replicate it and share it and edit it and all those things. So I started working by hand. And, you know, the argument for working by hand is, oh, it engages other parts of your, you know, your brain wiring. And I don't really know exactly what's going on. All I know is that when I started handwriting, a lot of things opened up for me. A whole flood of experiences started coming, and a whole lot of clarity came to me, and it doesn't come during the rest of the day. It comes when I'm writing.
Interesting.
So there's something that happened in that process that wasn't available when I was typing my thoughts. But when I started to write, something else happened, which was that while I was typing my journal for all those years and whatever I was doing before that, most of my writing in my journal was sort of like whining about the current state of affairs. And, you know, I know you know what I mean. That's why you laugh. And what I found is when I started handwriting, and also very strangely, my handwriting got better while I started handwriting the journal, that my introspective voice shifted from whining to massive creativity.
Wow.
So I think all these things sort of happen together, you know, but I find those two practices, that if you've got nothing else going, that to take on those two practices will be transformative. And again, I want to distinguish between meditating versus concentrating. And concentrating is great too. I'm not saying anything bad about it. It's just not the same kind of spiritual experience.
I love it. Oops. Thank you very much. I appreciate the answers to these questions that I love to ask all of my guests. Well, I think we've all on the call got to know you, Paul, a lot better than we did before, and your early journey and being raised by atheist parents, and then having hearing a voice in 1995, and then, you know, really beginning actively on your own spiritual journey here over the last 10 years or so, and the experiences that you've had. That's really quite a fascinating story. I'm going to open it up now to questions and discussion points from those folks who are on the call. You're welcome to raise up your hand, and we'll take you off of mute and invite you to talk to us, you know, live if you want, or you can type a question into the question box or into the chat log in your control panel, and we'll do our best to answer that. You can now, you're going to have to direct it to L or H, I think, since both of us are named Paul. You can direct it to one of both of us, or we can both take a stab at answering the question and just take turns on that. So Stephanie, who is also, by the way, I'll introduce to those of you who are on the call, Stephanie May, who's my right-hand person, our VP of Ops and Principal Consultant, and a person who is lovingly on her own personal journey as well, as we all are here at my company, to come onto the line and share with us if she has any questions for us today. Stephanie, are you there?
I am. Let's see, got a couple questions here.
Okay.
One of them I think he kind of answered already, so we'll come back to that one.
Okay.
This one, my mind is spinning all the time. How do I stop that? I agree.
Paul, you want to take a stab at that one?
Yeah, you know, this is the most basic meditation that I have ever heard. Is they call it watching your breath, and this goes back, you know, God, I think from the beginning. It's like the beginning of anybody teaching anything, and all you do is breathe. And when I say watch your breath, I mean there's nothing for you to watch with your eyes, right? But just to pay attention to your breath as it goes into you, and feel it go down through your lungs and feel it go through your nasal passages, and then pause for a moment and turn it around and breathe it out. And pay attention to it as it goes out. And your mind will spin, and you'll keep watching your breath, and your mind spinning will slow down, and you keep watching your breath, and your mind spinning will go away for very tiny little bits of time, and you keep watching your breath. And if you are very lucky, your mind spinning will actually stop. And it could stop for seconds, and it'll feel like years, or it could stop for an hour, and it'll feel like a lifetime.
Mhm.
And so that's a really easy thing that you can do. And I'll give you one more, and it's just another meditation, which is to, and again, I can't take credit for any of these things, but the other one is to, people have talked about repeating the word one, or the number one, and visualizing the one. And I'm thinking, well, what's so special about the one? So I started doing that. And what I found is the one keyed me into the unity of things, and the one keyed me into the all of things, you know, what some people call the universe and other people call God. And so the one is highly symbolic, and yet it's just one more thing that'll nicely hook your attention. And again, you just keep repeating it to yourself, one, you know, and you breathe gently, and one, and you breathe gently some more, and you just keep doing it. And if you do this for 15, 20 minutes, half an hour a day, or even 5 minutes if you have the time, it won't always quiet your mind. Sometimes your mind keeps spinning, but other times it quiets down. And it gives you that little respite from that constant chit-chat, and sometimes you even are transformed and transported. So I find that in the middle of the day, if I've been, you know, sometimes I'm working particularly hard, I feel like I need a break, I will sit down in my meditation chair, and I will do this for 5 minutes. I'll just watch my breath for 5 minutes, and the calming effect and the restorative effect is mind-boggling. So that, you know, that constant chit-chat, that constant spinning, that's the normal human condition. Do one of these things that I'm suggesting, and you can let go of that for little bits of time, and it's really quite wonderful.
Great answer. I'm gonna take a stab at answering it in my own way too, because I was one of those people whose my mind was constantly spinning. When I was 19 or 20 years old, you know, and it first began that introspection process of noticing what was going on, I found that I was essentially screaming to myself and at myself all the time. My internal dialogue was like a madman shouting about 2 or 3 or 4 different parallel streams of thoughts at all times. And the way that I was finally able to relax my mind and quiet it was through a wide variety of meditation techniques. But my very favorite one was to begin to listen to the thoughts and then slow the thoughts down just a little bit. I found that if it was difficult for me to let go of them, I could at least slow them down. And then I began to shift the nature, the quality, and the tone of the voice of the internal dialogue to where I was speaking to myself a little more kindly and a little more softly. And so then I began to speak to myself as if I was my very best friend, and if I was even a baby that I was holding in my arms, and speak lovingly and softly and gently to myself. And then it became very, very easy to shift those thoughts into something that were, you know, not screaming and yelling at me, but they were precious, but I was able to let them go very easily. And now, like you, Paul, I spend a lot of times in silence, sometimes just, you know, the spontaneous silence that comes from getting up and, you know, going to the refrigerator to grab a glass of water. So if your mind is spinning, as the person who asked the question had indicated, that there are lots and lots of ways to quiet that internal dialogue, to shift the tone of the internal dialogue, to replace those thoughts with other thoughts, which can be poems and songs, they can be mantras, they can be prayers. You know, you just end up replacing the wild and crazy thoughts with thoughts that are more gentle and more subdued, and then eventually you'll come to the place to where you're relaxed enough just to let that go and experience the silence, as Paul said, for a few minutes or maybe much longer than that. And I hope that was helpful to whoever answered that question about their mind constantly spinning. I know one of my very favorite things of all time is to just sit in the silence and watch my breath and watch the birds and, just revel in amazement at this human experience. Next question, Stephanie.
All right. Sarah wants to know what Paul's performing art was.
Mr. Lemberg, you said you were a performing artist.
No, I actually said I was a performance artist.
A performance artist, okay.
A performance artist, and that's a very different thing. So, yeah, no, I have been a performing artist. I'm a guitar and a bass player, and I used to be a blues shouter. But that's not what I was talking about.
What were you talking about?
What I was talking about, so I was a performance artist. So in the 1970s, there was a backlash against art as a valuable object that could be bought and sold.
Uh-huh.
Because and the philosophy of this was that it was that had nothing to do with art. That was commerce. That was ego-based collectors. That was wealthy people displaying their wealth. And this was I'm not aligning with this. I'm telling you what was. So what evolved out of that notion was something called conceptual art, which attempted to reduce art to its ideas. And importantly, not necessarily leave behind an artifact that could be bought or sold. So one of the cores of that was to start to do what was called performance art, which could have looked a lot like theater if it had a script. But performance art never had a script. It never had dialogue. It never had a story arc. It never had a plot. It was just whatever was happening on stage, the attempt at which was to put across whatever your artistic ideas were. So I was a performance artist. And it involved sculpture, and it involved things that looked a little bit like acting. It involved music. It involved poetry, and it involved any and all of these things. The most famous piece of performance art that ever comes to my mind was a guy named Vito Acconci, who did a piece on all these things ended up on video, by the way, because you had to communicate them somehow. And the most famous piece was a piece by this guy Vito Acconci, who did being born out of a laundromat thing, out of a big dryer in a laundromat. Yeah, so that just gives you a little bit of the flavor of it. Most of this stuff was bad. You wouldn't actually spend any time looking at it in the 21st century, but that's what we did in the late 70s.
I love it. I find it rather interesting, by the way, the parallels in our own lives, where the first 30 years of my career were in computer systems. I started programming computers in a long time ago, 1970. Right. And you and I also, enjoy being a musician as well. I sing. I don't play any instruments, but you play instruments too. And now we're both business consultants and both on this journey of personal and spiritual growth too. It's like we're brothers from another mother here with the same name.
That's actually pretty strange, Paul, when you put it all in that framework.
Yeah, of course, you're much taller and better looking than I am, so I'll give you that, and I'll take credit for some other things too. Stephanie, do you have any other questions for us today?
Yeah, let's see. Jean wants to know, my personal growth journey is going well, but my business is not. What should I do?
And as my guest, Paul, I'm going to let you handle that one first, and then I'll chime in with an idea or two.
Okay, so it's really hard to respond to that without having any idea of what your business is, but I'm going to just throw something out, which is, number one, are you doing what you want to do? That's not always a luxury that everybody has, by the way, so don't take that any other way than as the question I'm asking, because sometimes if you're doing things that, as I say, are not aligned with your soul's journey, then they just don't work. right? You can try to make them work. You can do all the best things possible, and they're just not going to work because that's not how things are supposed to line up for you. Now, I know that may sound a little airy-fairy, but it's what I believe. So number one is just dig into that and check out, is this really the direction that you're supposed to be going in? So that's like the first thing that I could offer you. Then after that, there's some pretty basics which have nothing to do with your inner journey, which is, do you have something that people want? Right? You may have something that you think is truly awesome, but nobody wants it. And if nobody wants it, you can do everything possible, and it's still not going to work. So that's the next thing I check into, which is, do you have something that people want and that they value, and that enough people want it, and they value it sufficiently that they're willing to pay you the money you ask? And often when people's businesses are going badly, that's where they're going badly. And they say, well, my market's wrong. Your market's not wrong. Your product's wrong for your market. So I would, if you just start with those two things, it's going to make a difference. After that, you have to ask the simple questions, which are, do I have enough people to talk to? In other words, do I have enough leads or opportunities or prospects? And if you don't, then that's where you need to focus your attention. The next question is, of the people you speak to, can you get them to buy from you? And if you can't, then you have to focus on your selling skills or your copywriting skills or, conversion of all kinds. And we don't have a lot of time, so if you just look at those four things, that should shift your experience immediately.
Those are great answers, and I agree with everything that you said, Paul. As an early step in our intake process, whenever we work with business owners, we do that gap analysis where we talk about all of the different areas of business. How are you doing in your business model itself? Is it viable? How is your marketing doing? And how is the market responding to your particular offer and your value propositions? How are your sales skills? And all of the critical things about business to really understand what gaps that you need to plug, what new skills you need to learn from a professional basis, on a professional growth basis, and then any sort of sense of things that you may need to overcome on a personal growth basis as well. Usually what we find is that people go into business without sufficient sales experience and without sufficient marketing expertise. To me, that's the number one gaps that we see for most businesses, is they go into business, the business owner jumps into business because they think they get to do what they love to do, be a programmer or a coach or a roofer or whatever it happens to be, only to learn that that's only 30 or 40% of the business at best, and they had no idea what the other 60 or 70% was all about, and they were unprepared and untrained to do those other jobs. So we help them figure out what the job really is and gain the skills that they need to gain, and step forth in personal courage sometimes in order to do the things that they've never done before, so that they can get the results that they really look for. So that'd be the way that I would answer that question as well. You can clearly tell that Paul and I have worked with lots and lots of businesses that are having challenges in their business performance, and we find ways of helping them make sure those next steps are the right steps and turn it around a little bit. We're right at the top of the hour.
Paul, can I just throw one thing in there?
You can do that, and then I'll also invite you to offer any closing comments, because we're coming to the top of the hour.
Well, this might be both my closing comment and my last thing,
okay.
Which is, you said something right at the beginning, and you quoted, I forget who it was, but you said everything you ever wanted is on the other side of fear.
Right.
And I have a parallel quote to that, which is that success begins just outside your comfort zone.
I love it.
And I think that's worthy of everybody who's thinking about their business, and also thinking about how their business ties into their spiritual life, which is that what I'm fairly certain of is most of the really good things in life occur in that place of discomfort. And it's axiomatic, which is that if you're comfortable with something, it's typically something that you've been doing for some time. And the results that you're getting from the thing that you've been doing for some time are totally baked into whatever your experience is. I mean, it actually can't be any other way. So if you're looking to transform your experience, it is almost always, in fact, I'll just go ahead and say, if you're looking to transform your experience, it is always inside, or rather outside of your comfort zone, that you're going to find the things that are going to lead you there. And so I just want to throw that out for everybody. Success begins just outside of your comfort zone. And that just covers about everything else that I could say, Paul. So I'm going to sign off with that.
Well, thank you for that. I love that quote. Did you make that up, or is that attributable to somebody?
No, I made that up.
I love it. Well, I'll attribute it to you, and I really love that quote. And frankly, I loved everything that you said today. I really want to thank you for being our guest here on An Awakened Conversation, for all of your frankness and your openness and your authenticity to your own journey, business journey and personal journey, and for the example that you set for other CEOs nationwide and worldwide about how business growth and personal growth go hand in hand and are really complementary of each other. So thanks again to Paul Lemberg, our special guest on the Awakened Conversation. We'll have another Awakened Conversation in 2 weeks, so watch your emails and we'll announce the guest to you then. And until we meet again, perhaps on our office hours this next Monday or another Awakened Conversation in a couple of weeks, this is Paul Hoyt thanking you for attending and wishing you a most marvelous and prosperous day. Bye-bye.